We are live. Thanks for joining us today for the Plutus Foundation webinar. We've had a great series of webinars so far, and we're continuing with some awesome stuff. So I'm happy today to present Eugene George, and we're going to talk today about childhood traumatic and adverse childhood experiences and how they affect your money story, and what influencers can do to better take childhood trauma of their audience into account when they give advice. So I'm excited about this. And Eugene, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Now, Eugene is the author of Our Money Stories. And I know, Eugene, you interviewed over 40 women of color and to talk about their experiences. Can you tell us a little about the book and what you might have learned from it?
Yeah, so basically, I've always been a fan of personal finance ever since I was 8 years old. And I told my mom that I wanted to learn how to golf because that's where business deals were made. So I've always known that I was supposed to be in finance, but of course, life got in the way. And I just kind of ignored that part of myself. And I was a teacher for a long time. I taught elementary school, and basically, I said, you know what? I'm going to start a business. And so I saved up all my money to start this business. And instead of really focusing on making money, I was purchasing all these money woo woo services. So what I mean by that, I believe in money mindset. I believe in all of those things. But what I noticed was a lot of the folks that were giving me advice did not have strong principles in finances. So I ran out of money. I got evicted from my apartment, and everything happened so fast. I went from like being, top of my class, getting a great job, like even I got into Teach for America, which is a really hard program to get into, had made all these accolades and lost my money like that, got evicted super quickly. And I was just completely depressed. And so I looked to Google for answers, and I said, okay, like no money, evicted from apartment, now what? And I Googled it, and it was one guy who became a millionaire at, 27. And it was a story about like, oh, I can build myself up. And I was like, well, this is not gonna work because I'm not a white guy, and I'm almost 30. So this idea is not gonna work for me. So then I typed it in. I was like, well, what if I type in Black woman eviction? Or what if I type in these things? And lo and behold, because I live in Philadelphia, Black women get evicted at a much higher rate than any group of folks in the city of Philadelphia. I believe it's 3 times higher. And there's this great book called Evicted that kind of follows folks that are underserved. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm middle class. Like this shouldn't be I shouldn't be having the same issues. And it was like, well, actually, based off your culture, based off of your scenario, you are not middle class. Even though you're making this income, you're not building wealth, or you're not understanding where wealth is. So then I basically was like, okay, I got to get the hell out of this problem. I don't know if you can, I'm just going to say hell. I'm going to get the hell out of this scenario, and I'm going to figure it out. And so then I applied to graduate school because I was like, okay, I need to sit and think about this. I applied to graduate school, and I applied to get a certified financial planning certification. I was like, I have to figure out money because I don't ever want to be in this scenario again. So during that time, I said, you know what, as I'm getting my CFP, as I'm getting my MBA, let me write a book during this experience. And I was like, okay, well, what's the biggest problems that I'm having? And I basically looked at the problems that I was having. I tracked, and I looked at policies that were in place that kind of created this friction and tension that I couldn't be super successful, or what have you. And then I just started asking women of color. So women that identified as Latinx, women that identified as Asian American, women that identified as Indigenous, and women that were African American. I said, can somebody please tell me their money stories? And people just started opening up to me. And I knew from reading personal finance books, I've spent so many hours reading personal finance books that the biggest piece that was missing from all of that was culture, environment, and overall trauma. It doesn't matter. A lot of financial, like personal finance experts, they had a really difficult time, which means that's how they started teaching this. So I was like, how come people aren't really focusing on that trauma piece? So then pretty much for 2 years, I focused on asking this question. And I wrote my book and everything under $2,000. Because I was like, we got to get this out. Okay. And I had a budget, but the goal was to figure out how we can use financial wellness as a way to help people understand the full, complete, holistic version of their money.
When you heard from everyone you interviewed about their money stories and about their trauma, what qualifies as trauma, and what struck you about the stories that they were telling you?
Well, for starters, I think the first thing was I was very humbled at how many folks were open to me, right? I said, hey, I'm a student. I'm learning the same thing as you. Let me tell you a little bit of my story. And literally the floodgates opened up and folks were just telling me the most traumatic experiences of their life. I went to therapy while I was doing this because I was like, whoa, it's a lot of stories that I wasn't used to. And the way that I describe and talk about trauma is through adverse childhood experiences. And so what that is, well, first of all, trauma happens in every day, right? You can get a text from someone that says like you're wrong with your job, or you can go outside. I live in the city, so like people screaming, that's a traumatic experience. But the way I defined it in the book was what happened to you in your childhood between the ages of 1 to 18. And there's actually the adverse childhood experience study was actually conducted by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. So there's actually a study that the CDC took, and they actually have done it with 32 states, I believe. And what they did was they try to find out, have someone been divorced, or they're a child of divorce? Has someone been sexually assaulted? Has someone had a parent that put them down? Did their family deal with drugs? Did their family deal with childhood neglect? Did the kid, were they neglected? And it's like a whole list of experiences that people have. And from that, they created a score, right? And so the score will say, you have one or more. Well, come to find out, in 2008, most adults had at least one ACE score, right? So most people had experienced some form of trauma, either neglect, abuse, something. And the biggest thing is, if it's not addressed, if the problem is not addressed, it is actually going to create long-term health effects and long-term mental health outcomes, right? And so in the story, I talk about my dad's trauma and how it was passed on to me. And one of the things that my father did was the way that he coped with his childhood neglect was drinking soda, which is actually a thing that the ACE community talks about. And that's
so
a way
drinking soda, and does that count as an adverse childhood experience?
It counts as a way to cope from childhood experiences. So like smoking cigarettes, different type of traumas that one can experience, they'll have like a coping effect or a long-term health effect. So what I did was like, okay, I know that this is like a way that we can track trauma, right? Well, can we use that to track money experiences? So that was the big thing. I was like, I know we can actually do healthcare. Okay, we have all these studies. So I actually called up the Financial Therapy Association, and I talked to the now president, and I said, hey, I got this idea, ACE scores, what do you think about them? And she was like, actually, the financial therapy communities actually were thinking about it, and we're talking about this. And we're trying to figure out, could you actually, your trauma affect the way you spend money? So then I interviewed the women and I said, well, let's see how your trauma plays out with your money. And one of the ladies that I interviewed, I named her Carmen in the book, but she experienced a lot of sexual trauma from her father, like really traumatic stuff. And you would never know that because she makes six figures. So no one would know, because on paper she looks great, right? But once we really realized the real issue, she was actually having trust issues with her husband right now. And she was so afraid to actually save money because her dad basically told her, like, the only way you can make money is through selling yourself, right? So she was like really good at selling herself, but she wasn't good at saving it. So there was like all this trauma that from this woman's experience from a child, it actually played out in her childhood.
You had mentioned your dad and his trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and how does how does a parent's trauma get passed down to children?
Well, we can't say like, yes, it's been completely passed down from, but from my parent or from my dad, a lot of the patterns that I had from with money had to do with the fact that my dad did not have a lot of money and did not grow up with money. So he left his family at 14. And so I actually asked questions. I asked my family members, hey, like, why did my dad move from Louisiana all the way to California by himself? Why did I wanted to know, like, why did he do what he did? And how did that affect who I am? And so basically, because my dad had childhood neglect, because he had experienced abuse, which I talk about in the book, that internalized with me, because once I turned 14 years old, my dad stopped raising me. So he stopped parenting me, because in his mind, it was like, oh, I've done my job. Like I got her to where she needed to be. But when I was 14, I went to a school that was affluent. And I was the chocolate chip in the, like, I was the only Black person in my grade. I think there was like maybe 6 or 7. And so I had to figure out my identity around that. Plus, they were affluent, they had money. So I didn't understand how people got wealth. I didn't understand how people talked to their parents. It was so culturally different. So my dad's trauma, him not parenting me after 14, really affected how I viewed men. It affected how I felt like I should never ask for any help, especially when it came to my finances. And when I got evicted, a lot of the stuff that I could have reduced the chances of getting eviction was me asking for help. So it all kind of created this history of, based off of my identity, based off of where my family grew up, I'm internalizing a lot of their trauma, but it's my responsibility to find out what that trauma is. So the Coke thing, the Coke thing was the start of the first part of the book, because it didn't occur to me that a lot of my dad's and my mother's, which I didn't really talk that much about, one parent trauma at a time. But my dad's trauma, I did the work. I called my aunts, I called my family members, and I try to figure out like how did my dad's trauma, and how did the trauma affect me from that Coke conversation that I had with my dad? Because I said, "Hey, Dad, why do you drink Coke all the time?" And he said, "It's the only thing that makes me feel close to home. It's the only thing that makes me feel connected." Because I used to drink Cokes with my family. So that it became like a 2-year obsession about finding out, like, okay, can our traumas be inherited to us? And then if so, what can we do to change that, or at least understand our own personal trauma through our own experiences?
Yeah. How can understanding your own trauma help you move forward?
Oh my gosh, it's understanding your trauma helps you get past your childhood and makes you understand how you are as an adult. It gives you compassion. It makes you more humble for your parents' experience. Because I think a lot of times what we're doing right now is we're getting mad at older generations, and we're saying like, oh my gosh, like, if they had done this right, then I wouldn't be in this position. So a lot of it is the language around how you speak to your parents. Even if your family is doing fine or doing well, there's a lot of trauma that happens with adults. And we have to also understand, like, this is the first real generation, the first like past, millennial, Z, and I'd say a little bit of Gen X, that they've had childhoods, right? So we need to acknowledge that. And I think that that's something that's really important. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So for people who have had, perhaps they have such a high ACE score, or they've had so much childhood trauma that they've disassociated with their family entirely. What are there any suggestions for how they can reconcile their trauma and move past that?
I think there's two things. One, I mean, I said this in the book. I said, hey, I'm not a therapist. One. Two, I went to therapy while I was going through this. The like 4 women that had the most traumatic stories that I worked with, they also got into therapy. So there, you do have to do extra additional work. If you have a higher ACE score, they actually have steps on aces2high.org, which will help you backtrack if that ACE score is high. Because one of the ladies that I interviewed who was Native American, her ACE score was 4, I think, or 5. And so there was a lot of issues with her health. And we know if you have a long-term health effect or issues, that the cost of living becomes more expensive, right? It's harder for you to get life insurance. It's harder for you to get great medical. And honestly, your medical, your life insurance, all that stuff really can affect your overall spending if your premiums are high. So particularly with her, she was trying to grapple with her identity as someone that was Native American. She was grappling with her trauma, being sexually assaulted. She was grappling with a lot of different things. And so what I just kept pushing for her to do is, how can we get to the place where either you can get therapy, or if you cannot afford it, how can you do Debtors Anonymous? So I talk about Debtors Anonymous. I love Debtors Anonymous over Workaholics, Work Anonymous, whatever your biggest trauma that you're dealing with. I said, if you can't afford those services, start calling in these anonymouses. because I think that is something that is free, and hearing other people's stories around their trauma around money or overeating or overspending or being on the internet for a longer period of time will give you hope for the next step for your own safety and your mental health. Yeah.
Are there any success stories, people who have you've talked to who have whether they've been through therapy or whether they've joined a support group? How has that helped their financial situation?
Well, going back to Carmen, who was in the book, she experienced the most amount of trauma that I mean, it was the first call that I like paused everything and cried myself because I couldn't handle it. It was a lot for me to understand because I had never been in that situation before. Her success story to me was amazing because one, she opened up to her partner, right, about everything. And that was something she hadn't done. So if you're open with your partner about your sexual trauma, you can be open with your partner about financial trauma, right? Like if you can say, hey, this experience happened to me with my parent, then you're able to open a lot of things that are happening. So with her, she started reading Dave Ramsey, Think and Grow Rich, all that stuff. And I said, I called her immediately because she's like she's not an influencer, but she's like doing social media and different things. And I said, please call me because you can, I mean, I never bash Dave Ramsey, but I said, if you're going through the type of trauma that you're going through, what we need to do is find a financial therapist. So let's find the books that you need to make sure that you're okay with your money. And so we found The Art of Money by Barry Tesler, which is much more like, how do you feel money in your body? Like, this is how you consciously bookkeep, right? Thank you. Yes, love Barry. She's amazing. And so we made steps like that. Brunches and Budget used to do they were doing a money thing for women of color. So Brunches Budget has a podcast, and they also do certified financial planning. So I said, hey, why don't you listen to Brunches and Budgets podcast? Because it's a little bit more on the political side, and you might actually enjoy that. So we found stuff that matched to her. And I think the biggest thing for anyone who's listening is that you have to find your personality type. You have to find the money people that match your personality type. And I think that that's really important, because not everybody connects with Jen Sincero, which is like, you are a badass at making. Some people are obsessed with her, mm-hmm. right? But that's like that boss babe, Sophia Amoroso, like that type of group. Yes, I want you to find those people that match who you are. But based off of your personality and your trauma, we got to find this like middle balance, which is, how can we nurture the thing that you are lacking? Right? So she was lacking the nurture part, so she needed Barry. Mm-hmm. But then you have some people that are super nurturing, but they need more practical, like, sit down. This is how you pay off debt. This is how you do it. Here's a community. Use Clever Girl Finance. Like, it's really about understanding who's going to nurture this scenario that you have.
For all those people out there who want to be someone like Barry Kessler or Jen Sincero or Dave Ramsey even, how can they provide a better service to their audience by recognizing that many people have traumatic experiences in their past which present obstacles for them, even when it comes to taking the most basic financial advice, like save, don't spend more than you earn?
I think that's probably the most loaded question. It's because, and I say that because, SEO is whatever is getting clicks. Typically, the thing that's getting clicked is like, 25-year-old made it to Forbes 40 under 40, like crushing it in their money. Here's how I'll show you. And so those things are the clickbait that's the thing that folks typically pay attention to when they're looking for money stuff. Also, most people, when they're searching for money topics, it's either they're in complete crisis and they're trying to get out, or they're like that, entrepreneur, like, this is how I got it made to the top. So I think whoever's thinking about writing with that frame of mind, there's two things that I always suggest. One thing is, in your website, there needs to be some diversity or inclusion action plan that says, like, it just takes one page. So it can say, like, I'm someone who grew up in Idaho, and I grew up underprivileged, and it's because of that underprivilege I understand this, and this. Or in my instance, I say, hey, I'm all about helping women of color, because for a long time, I believe that I had to basically emulate a guy to make money. And I realized once I emulated myself, then I was able to be successful, or something like that. And it's my goal is actually not to pump out a bunch of content. My goal is, how can we find the best financial therapists? How can we find the best CFPs? How can we find the best personal finance writers? How can I create a resource page that helps more than 100,000 people? So kind of like create an initiative I kind of create it based around my trauma, right? I think that's one way you can do it. The other thing is, be really careful with the language that you use, right? A lot of people, when they're writing, and even my book started off, it was called Not Your Average White Guy's Money Book. That was the title.
That's a good title.
But it's still terrible, because, like, I learned this from my writing group, but basically they were saying, you don't want to be the person that's like, I'm mad at guys, so I'm going to write the opposite book. What you want to do is make sure that you're caring, and you're not going to take this lightly, because Not Your Average White Guy, that's more, that's like, haha, funny, right? So I had to really be very careful about the language that I use, so that people, when they come to me, even though I'm like super type A, like, let's knock out a lot of stuff before I get pregnant, blah, blah, blah. When people read the book, that's not what they're going to see. What they're going to see is someone that's nurturing, someone that's honest, and someone that is actually cares. And I think when people are writing, we have to be really careful about saying, like, I did it and so can you, or here are 5 steps. Now, if you do that, that's fine. But you have to have kind of a disclaimer that says, hey, this took a long time. It took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Like, it's not you do this or you die experience. And I think that's really important. I think I love the FIRE, it was the FRE, FIRE community. But I always have to tell people, when they ask me, like, what do you think about FIRE or whatever, I say, I've talked to a lot of FIRE folks, and a lot of FIRE folks had some type of trauma. So if you know what their trauma is, then definitely I'm like, go ahead, read everything, do it. But I think there's a lot of FIRE folks that had a traumatic experience, and they made it a promise, like, I will retire early, or I will never be in lack. And this is why they put all their focus into that thing. So I think it's really important for folks and writers to really understand where they are with their own story. Because we all have it. We all have at least one traumatic experience, and how that's affecting our writing. I'm not saying change everything now, but start thinking like, oh, you know what? My mom did tell me money doesn't grow on trees. Or, you know what? My dad said, this ethnicity makes more money than I do. So we do have to be really careful about what we say and how we say it on our blogs.
Yeah, that's really important. So we have a few questions from the audience that I'll bring up. So there's one person who would like to know how you build back up from feeling like you are always dealing and having to deal with your trauma. For example, with the eviction, how do you prevent yourself from spiraling back and just repeating the same mistakes?
Well, one, I talked about having a money journal. So I wrote a money journal. I think it was Alexis von Tobel who wrote Financially Fearless, and she was always said like, well, what's your first experience with money? And I would literally write out these traumatic experiences. I think the first thing is sit with it. You have to sit with it. That's what like Buddhist people say, or like, there's a lot of Buddhists that say like, in order for you to be the lotus flower, you got to sit on top of it. Like there's always going to be stuff, right? There's just always going to be stuff. So the biggest thing is to figure out, when do you have those WTF moments, right? And I even created a stream of income that says WTF funds, right? Because for me, one of the things that happens for me, my trigger points is when I'm sad, I don't like to express my feelings. So I typically wear it on my face. There's always this like scrunch feeling, and everyone knows my energy because it's like, I need a view working, work. And I won't do anything. I won't do yoga. I won't focus on my health, right? And so the way that I track that spiral is, one, I'll like go into my old money journals and say like, I think something's not right. Two, I'll have that WTF fund, because typically what happens when I'm stressed is I need to learn more. So I'll like buy like 20 books and I'll self-help myself until I go numb. But that costs like $120, right? To buy all these books. So I have that fund where I go back in. The other thing is I used to track it on my phone. I had a mood meter. I used to be a teacher, and we used to do this mood meter thing where you can track how you're feeling. And I started tracking through my mood meter. And now I do the bullet journal, right? I'm really into the bullet journal because I literally just will write out feeling miserable. And I'm able to track literally the third week of every month is when I shut down. My body just shuts down. So this week, after I get off this call, and tomorrow's my birthday. So
happy birthday.
Thank you. I'm going to shut down, and I already know that. And so now it gets to the point where I start my month at the end of the third week. So you really start paying attention to your habits. If that might mean write in a journal, that might mean track it on your phone, but figure out where those patterns are. And if you can seek help for that, or even seek a friend's help for that, do that and say, hey, I'm going to text you once on the 15th, because that's when I go off the rails. Like, I just need you to tell me that I'm okay, that I'm doing well. Just kind of create those back end, those extra help pieces to help you along the way.
So through tracking and, whether you're using the Mood app or the journal, did you determine what some of your triggers were? Or is it just a timing thing?
No, it's people.
I I know the feeling.
It's like straight up people. So I have a very unique scenario. Not really. I'm not unique, but I am marrying into a family. So was the single one, and I'm marrying into a family. So I'm a stepmom to a 14-year-old and an 8-year-old. And so that experience is triggering for me because I think Jerry Seinfeld said it, that the you relive your thank you. I think Jerry Seinfeld said, like, you relive all your childhood experience when you're dealing with a kid. And
Mhm.
so I think that that's something that's really important because they have their own trauma, right? They already have their ACE. I already kind of know some of their ACE score stuff. And it's triggering for me because culturally, like where what's happening, they're being triggered by a lot of stuff. And then now I'm at the point where I've always paid attention to other people's emotions, not by like being the emotional one, but tracking it. Like I used to think I was on the spectrum for a long time because I would be like, oh, when I was a teacher, I would say, oh, yep, at 12:35, this kid's going to do this kid's going to do this. So I just started like creating these patterns. So it was really about the people. So, every quarter, there's always this part where everyone in the house is kind of like off the rails. And so I know when that happens. And then, like I said, for me personally, I will work. And typically the third week of the month is when I kind of shut down.
Mhm.
And so I'm just okay with that. Like, oh, I'm just not going to take that many meetings that week, or like, I just can't do it. So I'm okay with that.
So as you're moving into this role as a stepmom, how are you and how can other people ensure that they're not the source of adverse childhood experiences for their children?
That's so hard because there are so many times where I'll say something and I'll be like, oh my gosh, my mom said that and that's not good. Um, or I just recognize that they're going to be okay. But I think with parents, there's a couple of things. I read the Grief Handbook, which is like grieving over a loss of something, or
Mhm.
it also can be grieving over someone's death. But I learned how to basically grieve over me being single, or me having a different life through that process. I like walked myself through it, which is really random.
Hmm.
I also read, what was the other book that I read? There's a lot of books I read that I don't agree with anymore. Um, because I was a teacher, I think that also has a different way of me viewing stuff. But I will say, although it's heavily debated now, the book Mindset by Carol Dweck really helped me frame all of the issues that I had as a kid. Somebody said, like, you're not smart enough. I started thinking about, okay, well, what are all the things that I say that I'm not good at? And are some of those things achievable? So when I was a teacher, I said I didn't really teach math that much. I was like, well, I'm not really that great at it. And then I had to think about it and say, well, actually, you are. You
Mhm.
used to be really good at it. So what happened? So then it was me tracking that. So a lot of the stuff that you're going to project onto your child or your children are the fixed mindset ideas that you have. And it's really important to think about, well, what did I think about when I was 5? Or what did my parents tell me? What did I think about when I was, 12? 12 was really wonky. 12 to 13 are some
Mhm.
wonky years.
Sure.
And then, what did I think about when I was 20?
So with ACE scores, is there any kind of correlation, um, like a specific correlation between ACE scores and financial achievement?
Okay, so my goal in life is to create the metric behind it.
Okay.
That's like my big thing. Of course, that requires some schooling, and right now I'm like learning data science for that. That's from my WTF money. I was like, there's not a metric. But there's a couple, I can't say yet, but there's a couple of papers that are going to come out soon in the academic world that we'll probably talk about, ACE scores. I think I was able to, in the book, explain how ACE scores can create scarcity for folks. But no, there is not anything yet that has a score on ACE scores and trauma. And I think the biggest reason why is because the way we're viewing and looking at behavior economics really doesn't look at trauma. So the people that we respect, the behavior economics that a lot of folks really pay attention to, still hasn't hit that. It's still based off of, I don't want to get too into it, but it's still based off of you save money, you make a lot of, you make wealth, or you lose a lot of money and you're poor, right? There's really just black and white experiences. And so I'm hoping within the next couple of, hopefully knock book deals, I'm hoping that we are able to find that correlation.
Yeah, I think it sounds like there's some exciting research happening now, and I think it could change the way we think about money and how we give money advice as well. All right, is there anything else that you would like to cover today?
No, I mean, there's only so much. It's a lot when people are first talking about ACE. It's just overwhelming. It's like, what? My trauma could affect my my long-term health, and sometimes my long-term money issues. I think the biggest thing is just, if there's a lot of things that are going on emotionally, just really try to figure out ways to seek out help. You could be the person that's making a lot of money, but I always like to use Tom Cruise as a great example. I know this sounds wacky, but I read all about Tom Cruise's childhood trauma. I was like, oh my gosh, this is bananas. I don't know why I got into that, but I was like, oh my gosh, Tom Cruise is a person that has so much money, right? Like, is living the dream, but you can still see a lot of his ACE scores played out in the relationships that he has with the people he was involved with in his relationship. So just know that everybody has trauma. I always say it's like trauma for your mama. Like, everybody has trauma. So it's really important to just be okay with that and then grow from there. I really try to stress that as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think that people might not even realize that some of the financial difficulties that they're having might come from trauma. How can you take the ACE test to determine kind of where you stand on this scale?
Yeah, if you type in ACE score, I think it's ace.org. You could take it that way. You can take it at acestoohigh.org. Some people are like, I know I have a higher ACE. And if you're really interested about learning the breakdown, there's a great TED Talk by the current California Surgeon General, Dr. Nadine Harris Burke. And she does a great job of explaining ACE scores and her process and why ACE scores were so important for her medical practice. And I think that will help a lot of folks just see the big ahas before they take the test, because it's a lot. It's a lot for someone to be like, someone in the chat asks, how do you stop spiraling? If you're constantly spiraling, it would be more traumatic for you to go and find out your ACE score sometimes because you're already spiraling. So really start with, okay, well, what are the patterns that I have when I was a kid? What was the first experience that I learned about with money? What did my parents tell me about money? What did my friends tell me about money? What did society tell me about money? Um, and just take a journal entry and write that out before you start running to every financial therapist, which there really aren't that many, or therapists and trying to figure it out. So I would just say be really gentle with it, because again, the book
Mhm.
took me to it took me 4.5 years, so 4 years to get out of an eviction, and then it took me 2 years to write a book. So it took a while, and I had no friends, not like a lost friend, you know what I mean, but like
Yeah.
it was all day. How can we like get this idea pumped out, even if it's not the best? Like I was like, I know I wanted something. I wrote an article for Michael Kitces, who is like really big in the financial planning industry, financial advisor industry, and I got lots of like, oh my gosh, this makes sense. I was like, if the financial people are saying it, then I know everyday regular folks are experiencing it and have no language around it. So just be really gentle with yourself.
So you tell us again how we can get your book.
Yeah, it's on Amazon. It's called Our Money Stories, a 6 week, no BS, holistic financial plan. Uh, and you can find me on Twitter. I do a lot of rants on Twitter, and it's underscore Eugene George. And then I'm on Instagram to kind of be cute, but I'm just doing a lot of writing. So I've been writing stuff for CNBC lately, the financial diet. So yeah, you'll probably see me now that you know my name, Euphigenia or Eugene. Then you'll see me.
Well, we certainly appreciate your being here with the Plutus Foundation as well, given all the other places that you've been, touring lately. So yeah, thank you so much, Eugene.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so stay tuned for more webinars from the Plutus Foundation. We have some more coming up. And certainly go to our website at plutusfoundation.org, where you can subscribe to our podcast, see what's going on with the Plutus Awards, and also take a look at our angle when it comes to financial literacy. So thank you all for joining.